The world had become a series of hard edges and indifferent surfaces for Alara. At 17, she had learned the specific chill of a bus station bench at 3 a.m., the unforgiving texture of pavement through thin-soled shoes, and the hollow echo a stomach makes when it has been empty for too long. Her guardian, a distant cousin who had taken her in more from a sense of weary duty than affection, had passed quietly, and with her went the thin buffer that had stood between Alara and the vast, uncaring machinery of the state. She was a ghost in the making, a loose thread about to be snipped from the social fabric, her entire existence packed into a worn backpack that felt heavier with each passing day. The grief she felt was a tangled thing, less for the woman herself and more for the sudden, terrifying absence of any anchor at all. She was adrift on a gray ocean of anonymity, and the shore was nowhere in sight. The letter that found her was a minor miracle of bureaucratic persistence, a piece of paper that had chased her through 2 temporary addresses before a kind-hearted shelter worker finally pressed it into her hand. It was from a law firm in a town she had never heard of, a place called Solitude Valley. The paper was thick, creamy, and felt alien against her calloused fingers. It spoke of a great-aunt, a woman whose name, Isolde, was a faint, mythical whisper from her early childhood. She had died, and she had left Alara everything she had. Everything, as it turned out, was a mockery of the word. It was 5 acres of land and a shack that had long ago given up its argument with gravity. The lawyer, a man named Mr. Reed, with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that held a universe of professional pity, had driven her out to the property. The drive itself was a descent into a forgotten world. The valley was a long, narrow fold in the earth, flanked by hills that were more like weary shoulders slumped against a perpetually overcast sky. The town of Solitude Valley was a handful of buildings, huddled together as if for warmth, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin. The farm, if one could grant it such a generous title, was at the valley's far end, where the road turned to gravel and then simply gave up. Mr. Reed's car complained with a series of metallic groans as he navigated the final rutted track. When he stopped the engine, the silence that rushed in was profound, broken only by the thin, keening cry of the wind moving through the skeletal remains of what had once been a field of lavender. The color was gone, replaced by a uniform, dusty gray. The plants were brittle, dead stalks that rattled like bones. The air, which should have been thick with the scent of summer and flowers, smelled only of dust and decay. The house was a testament to slow surrender. Its spine was bent, the porch canted at a drunken angle, and a pane of glass in the front window was a spiderweb of cracks held together by dirt and desperation. Alara stood before it, the lawyer's car a humming, impatient presence behind her, and felt a kinship with the derelict structure. It was as lost as she was. "It's not much, I'm afraid," Mr. Reed said, his voice carefully neutral. He cleared his throat. "The back taxes are considerable. Almost $2,000. The town council, specifically Mr. Abernathy, has already made an offer to acquire the property to settle the debt. $500 clear. Frankly, given the state of it, it's a generous offer. It would give you a little something to start over with. Somewhere else." His words were practical, sensible. They were also a dismissal. He saw a problem to be solved, a piece of legal tidying up. He did not see the 17-year-old girl in front of him who had nowhere else to go, for whom this patch of dead earth and this broken house were the only things in the entire world that bore her name, however tangentially. She looked from the dead fields to the collapsing house, and a feeling she had not experienced in a very long time began to stir in her chest. It was not hope. It was something harder, something with more fight in it. It was defiance. She turned to the lawyer, her chin lifted just a fraction. "I'll keep it," she said, and her voice was steadier than she expected. Mr. Reed blinked, his professional mask slipping for a moment to reveal genuine surprise. He saw a child playing at being an adult, a decision born of foolish pride. He sighed, a sound of resignation. As you wish. The debt is now yours. The town will expect payment within 6 months, or they will seize the property regardless. He handed her a large rusted iron key. Its weight was absurd, a solid piece of history. Then he got back into his car and with a final pitying glance, drove away, leaving Alara alone with her inheritance of dust and silence. The first few days were a blur of cold and labor. The house was a repository of damp and neglect. Every surface was coated in a fine layer of dust that seemed to be the physical manifestation of time itself. The air inside was thick with the smell of mice and forgotten things, but there was a wood stove that, after a terrifying amount of black smoke, proved to be sound. There was a hand-crank pump over the kitchen sink that, after an hour of furious, back-straining work, coughed up a trickle of rusty water that eventually ran clear and tasted of cold, clean stone. There was a bed with a mattress that smelled of mildew but was blessedly horizontal. Alara worked with a methodical fury fueled by the gnawing fear of what would happen if she failed. She swept, she scrubbed, she hauled out rotting textiles and broken furniture. She was an archaeologist excavating the ruins of a life she'd never known. In a small, locked chest under the bed, she found them, her great-aunt's journals. There were a dozen of them, leather-bound and filled with a spidery, elegant script that covered every page. At first, she thought they were gardening logs. There were notes about planting cycles, about rainfall, about the lavender. But as she read deeper, curled up by the greedy warmth of the stove, while the wind howled outside, she realized they were something else entirely. Isolde had not been writing about the surface of the land. She had been writing about its soul. The journals spoke of things Alara didn't understand. They mentioned the deep warmth and the stone veins. There were intricate hand-drawn maps of the 5-acre property, but they didn't show the rows of lavender. Instead, they showed a complex, almost biological network of lines that snaked beneath the fields, converging and branching like the roots of some colossal, unseen tree. Isolde wrote about the unique geology of the valley, a pocket of volcanic soil, rich in minerals but porous, unable to hold water near the surface. "The fools see only thirst," one entry read. "They pour water on the top and curse the sun when it vanishes. They do not understand that the life of this place is not in the sky. It is in the belly of the earth." The entries became more specific, more obsessive. She described a system of ancient stone culverts, buried 6 feet deep, a remnant of some forgotten agricultural civilization. They were not for drainage, as a casual observer might assume. They were, Isolde insisted, for thermal regulation and sub-irrigation. "The stones breathe," she wrote. "In the heat of summer, they draw the cool from the deep soil and exhale it to the roots. In the winter, they hold the memory of the sun, a faint, persistent warmth that keeps the deepest frost at bay." Alara read about how her great-aunt had spent years trying to clear and restore this system, but her body had failed before her work was complete. The last entry was dated 2 years prior. "The northern channel is blocked. A collapse near the old oak. Without the full circuit, the system is dormant. The fields will die. I have failed them." A new understanding dawned on Alara. Her inheritance was not the dead lavender on the surface. It was this hidden, sleeping system underneath. What was left behind was not a secret stash of money or a forgotten heirloom. It was a secret technology, a different way of seeing the world. This was the insight, the flicker of unconventional hope she had been searching for without knowing it. The mockery of the town, the pity in Mr. Reed's eyes, the condescending offer from Mr. Abernathy. They were all based on what was visible. They saw a failed farm on thirsty land. They couldn't see the intricate breathing network of stone that lay sleeping just a few feet beneath their boots. The path forward was suddenly terrifyingly clear. She did not need to fix the farm. She needed to awaken it. She took one of the journals, the one with the most detailed map, and a rusted shovel she found in the leaning shed, and walked out into the gray morning. The wind cut through her thin jacket, and the dead lavender stalks clawed at her ankles. She found the spot marked on the map as the northern blockage, near a gnarled, the ancient oak at the edge of the property. The ground was hard, compacted by years of neglect. She placed the tip of the shovel on the earth, put her foot on its shoulder, and pushed. The ground resisted. It was like trying to bite into stone. But she pushed again, putting all of her 17 years of grief and fear and stubborn, hard-won survival into the motion. The metal scraped, groaned, and then, finally, bit into the soil. The work had begun. Days melted into a grueling rhythm of digging. Ilara was not a farmer. She was a miner, an excavator of forgotten things. The topsoil was a thin, grudging layer, and beneath it was a dense, clay-like substance, interwoven with a mesh of thirsty roots. Each shovelful was a battle. Her hands, soft from a life spent indoors, quickly blistered. The blisters broke, bled, and eventually hardened into calluses that felt like leather. Her back screamed in protest, a constant burning ache that radiated from her spine to her shoulders. At night, she would collapse onto the lumpy mattress, too exhausted to even dream, her sleep a dead weight that barely refreshed her. She would wake in the pre-dawn chill, her muscles screaming, and force herself back out into the field with the rising sun. She was fueled by stale bread, tins of beans, and the words in Isolde's journals. She read them every night, absorbing her great-aunt's voice, her quiet, fierce belief in the land. The journals became her scripture, her instruction manual, her only companion. She learned to read the land not by its surface, but by its subtle contours, the slight depressions that hinted at the path of the channels below. She was chasing a ghost, a theory, a mad woman's dream written in a dusty book, and every aching muscle told her she was a fool. The town of Solitude Valley watched her. Her nearest neighbor, a man named Silas, farmed the adjacent plot. He was a man carved from the valley itself, weathered and stoic, his face a roadmap of droughts and hard winters. He had known Isolde, remembered her as the eccentric Lavender woman. He watched Ilara from his tractor as she toiled, a small, solitary figure in the vast, dead field, digging a trench that seemed to lead from nowhere to nowhere. One afternoon he shut off his engine and walked over, his boots making deep prints in the loose earth she had excavated. He was a tall man, and he cast a long shadow over her. "What in God's name are you doing, girl?" he asked, his voice not unkind, but heavy with a deep, weary skepticism. Ilara, leaning on her shovel and breathing hard, shielded her eyes from the sun. "I'm clearing the channels," she said. Silas squinted at the trench. He saw nothing but dirt and rocks. "That's just old field drainage. Hasn't worked in a century. The soil's too porous. Water just vanishes. Your great-aunt chased that same fool's errand for years." He shook his head slowly. "You're wasting your strength. This land is thirsty. Always has been, always will be. You can't fight the nature of a place." Ilara straightened up, her back protesting. She said, "It's not for drainage. It's for warmth. From the deep earth." The words sounded thin and foolish, even to her own ears. Silas let out a short, humorless laugh. He looked at her blistered hands, the smudges of dirt on her face, the fierce, desperate exhaustion in her eyes, and his expression softened into something like pity. "Look, child, I'll not tell you how to live, but you're going to break yourself on this folly. There's no warmth to be had from cold ground." He left a small sack on the edge of the trench, Inside were 2 apples and a thick slice of bread and cheese. He walked away without another word, the gesture a mixture of kindness and dismissal. He was feeding a stray, not encouraging an innovator. Silas's skepticism was a quiet, personal thing. The rest of the town was not so gentle. Her weekly walk into the village for supplies became an ordeal. Whispers followed her down the aisle of the general store. They called her the mole girl, the crazy dirt digger. The children would sometimes run to the edge of her property and chant taunts until she stared them down with a silence that was more unnerving than any shout. The main source of the town's derision, however, was Mr. Abernathy. He was the head of the town council, a man whose ambition was far larger than the small valley he governed. He saw progress in terms of concrete and commerce, and Alara's derelict farm was an eyesore, a blight on his vision for a tidy, profitable future. He wanted the land for a new municipal storage facility and saw Alara not as a person, but as a temporary, irritating obstacle. He found her in the field one day, her trench now nearly 4 feet deep and 20 feet long. He stood on the edge, his polished shoes a comical absurdity against the raw earth. "Miss," he began, his tone dripping with false concern, "this is becoming a spectacle. The good people of this town are worried about you. A young girl, all alone, digging in the dirt like like an animal." He gestured vaguely at her work. "This is clearly too much for you. My offer still stands. $500. A bus ticket to anywhere you'd like to go. You can put this foolishness behind you." Alara didn't stop digging. She just sunk the shovel into the earth again, the rhythmic scrape and thud her only reply. His condescension hardened into irritation. "You have 5 months to pay the back taxes. 5 months. And this," he kicked a clump of dirt into her trench, "is not earning you a penny. This is madness. It is an offense to common sense." She finally stopped and looked up at him, her eyes clear and steady. "It's my land, Mr. Abernathy, and I'm not digging for pennies. I'm digging for life." He scoffed a sharp, ugly sound. "You'll find nothing but worms and disappointment." He turned and walked away, his back rigid with indignation. The confrontation left her shaken, but also strangely solidified. His scorn was a whetstone, sharpening her resolve to a razor's edge. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. The trench grew, snaking its way across the field, a long, ugly scar on the land. She finally hit it, the top of the stone culvert. It was a flat, heavy capstone, perfectly fitted against its neighbors. Her heart hammered against her ribs. It was real. Isolde's maps were not the ramblings of a lonely old woman. They were truth set to paper. With a crowbar she'd bought with her dwindling funds, she managed to pry the first stone loose. The air that rose from the darkness below was cool and smelled of damp earth and something else, something ancient and clean. Peering inside, she could see a round channel, about 2 feet in diameter, lined with smooth, dark stones. It was filled almost to the top with silt and roots that had forced their way through the cracks over decades of neglect. The real work, she now understood, was not the digging down, but the clearing out. She spent the next weeks on her hands and knees, often working halfway inside the suffocating darkness of the channel itself, pulling out compacted soil and tangled roots by the handful. It was claustrophobic, filthy, back-breaking labor. She lost all track of time, her world shrinking to the few feet of dark tunnel illuminated by her cheap headlamp. Progress was measured in inches, not feet. Some days, she would clear less than a yard, her body screaming for her to stop. But then she would feel it, a faint, almost imperceptible current of air moving through the channel, a sign that somewhere far down the line she was getting closer to an opening, that the stone lungs of the earth were beginning to draw their first shallow breath in a generation. Silas continued to watch her, He never spoke of her project again, but he left things for her: a basket of vegetables from his garden, a jug of fresh milk, a pair of thick leather gloves that saved her hands from the worst of the abuse. His charity was silent, observational. He was a scientist studying a strange, inexplicable phenomenon. He saw the piles of silt and roots growing beside the trench. He saw the girl herself getting thinner, tougher, her face tanned by the sun and etched with a permanent, weary determination. He did not understand what he was seeing, but he recognized the sheer, stubborn force of will. He had seen it in mules, in seasons, in the land itself. It was a force to be respected, even if it was directed at an objective he considered pure folly. One day, as she was hauling a bucket of sludge from the tunnel, he called over to her. "Weather's turning. Heard it on the radio. They're talking about a late frost, a bad one, coming in 2 nights. He said it casually, a simple statement of fact, a piece of farmer's talk, but it was a warning. A frost like that could kill a young crop, and while Alara had no crop to speak of, the news sent a jolt of panic through her. The journals had spoken of the frost. The system must be whole, Isolde had written. The circuit must be complete. Only then can the deep warmth rise to meet the cold kiss of the sky. According to the maps, she was only feet away from clearing the final blockage and connecting the northern channel to the main artery that ran beneath the old farmhouse. 2 nights. It wasn't enough time. It had to be. The sky on the final day was a bruised, unsettling shade of purple and gray. The air grew still and heavy, carrying a strange, metallic taste. A profound cold began to seep out of the earth itself. The birds were silent. All across Solitude Valley, farmers were in a quiet panic, covering their tender spring crops with tarps and burlap, their movements hurried and anxious. It was a race against the inevitable. They were trying to protect the surface, to shield their plants from the killing air. Alara knew her battle was not on the surface. It was underground. She worked with a feverish energy she didn't know she possessed. She ignored the hunger in her belly and the fire in her muscles. Her world was the dark, cramped tunnel. The blockage was a gnarled mass of ancient oak roots, thick as a man's arm, that had shattered one of the capstones and choked the channel completely. She hacked at them with a small hatchet, the impacts jarring her arms to the shoulder. Splinters of wood and stone flew past her face. She worked by the dim light of her headlamp, sweat and dirt running into her eyes, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The cold was a physical presence now, pressing in on her, making her fingers numb and clumsy. She felt a wave of despair wash over her. It was too much. The roots were too thick, the time too short. She was going to fail. She slumped against the cold, damp wall of the culvert, the hatchet falling from her numb fingers. She was just a girl in a hole in the ground. Abernathy was right. Silas was right. The whole town was right. It was all a fool's errand. Then she heard it, a whisper, not a voice, but a feeling, a memory of Isolde's script, of the fierce, unwavering belief on every page. The stones breathe. She closed her eyes, pressing her cheek against the smooth, cold rock of the channel wall. She tried to feel it, to believe in it. She imagined the network of stone veins spreading out beneath her, a vast, sleeping circulatory system. She imagined the deep, geothermal warmth of the Earth's core, a gentle, constant heat, waiting. All it needed was a pathway. All it needed was for her to finish. The despair receded, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. She picked up the hatchet. She began to swing again, not with frantic energy now, but with a steady, relentless rhythm. Chop, chop, chop. The sound echoed in the confined space. A root splintered, then another. Finally, with a great, groaning crack, the main root gave way. She pulled the tangled mass out of the channel, and then she felt it, A slow, gentle sigh of air moved past her cheek. It was not cold. It was cool, but not frigid. It smelled of deep earth and stone and water. It was the first breath of the awakened system. She scrambled out of the trench, her body screaming in protest, and ran, stumbling through the dying light to the other end of the system, a small stone-lined well behind the house that Isolde's maps had marked as the intake heart. She cranked the old pump, not for water, but to prime the system, to create the pressure differential that the journals described. As darkness fell and the temperature plummeted, she had done all she could. Now she could only wait. The frost arrived just after midnight. It was a silent, predatory thing, a ghost that settled over the valley. It coated every surface with a thick, crystalline layer of white. It was a killing frost, the kind that broke hearts and bankrupted families. In his house, Silas sat by the window, watching the thermometer on his porch drop to a number that made him feel sick. 25 degrees. 24. He thought of his own fields, the tender shoots of his spring planting, and knew they were already gone. A season's work, a year's income, turned to black, frozen mush. A bitter anger rose in him, not at the weather. A farmer learned not to curse the sky, but at his own powerlessness. Then his gaze drifted across the fence line, toward the dead Lavender farm, toward the mad girl who dug in the dirt, and he saw something that made him stand up, his face pressed against the cold glass. In the stark silver light of the moon, the entire valley was gleaming white, a landscape of diamonds and death. But Alara's 5 acres were different. A faint, ethereal mist was rising from the ground, swirling in lazy patterns around the dead lavender stalks. It was not smoke, it was vapor, a visible exhalation, as if the field itself were a living, breathing creature. While his land was frozen solid, hers was steaming. He could not comprehend it. It defied every law of nature he had ever known. He pulled on his boots and a heavy coat and walked out into the devastating cold. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Every step he took on his own land was accompanied by the sharp crackle of frozen grass. He reached the fence line and stopped, staring in disbelief. The ground on Alara's side was not frozen hard. It was cool but yielding. The mist was thickest along the lines where she had been digging. He could feel a faint, almost imperceptible warmth radiating up through the soles of his boots. It was impossible. It was a miracle. He saw a light on in her ramshackle house, and, driven by a need to understand that was stronger than his pride, he walked toward it. He found her in the kitchen, huddled by the wood stove, wrapped in a blanket, her face pale with exhaustion. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with fear, thinking it was Abernathy come to mock her. When she saw it was Silas, his face a mask of awe and confusion, she simply waited. He stood there for a long moment, the cold air from outside swirling around his feet. He looked from her face to the window, to the steaming field beyond. How? The word was a croak, barely audible. The stones, she said, her voice quiet. They're breathing. He sank into the other chair by the stove, a big, strong man suddenly made small by a mystery he could not fathom. He looked at her blistered, dirt-caked hands. He thought of her solitary labor, the whispers, the mockery. He thought of his own certainty, his weary, paternalistic pity. "I'll be damned," he whispered, shaking his head. She was right. The old woman was right all along. They sat in silence for the rest of the night. Two solitary figures by a warm stove, while outside the world froze and a single 5-acre patch of earth gently, stubbornly breathed. When the sun rose, the devastation it revealed was absolute. The valley looked as if it had been scoured by a colorless fire. Fields that had been green and promising the day before were now a uniform blackened ruin. The air was filled with the quiet, desperate cursing of farmers walking through their dead crops. It was a day of financial and emotional ruin for Solitude Valley, but on Alara's property, something impossible had occurred. The frost lay heavy on the dead lavender stalks, but beneath them the earth was dark and damp. She walked out into the field with Silas at her side. She knelt down and pushed her fingers into the soil. It was cool but alive. She pulled up a small, dormant lavender root. It was pliable and pale, not the frozen, brittle stick it should have been. The deep warmth had not been a roaring fire, but it had been enough. It had kept the soil temperature just above freezing, protecting the delicate root systems from the killing cold. The plants themselves were dead, but their foundations, their life source, had been preserved. She had not saved a crop, she realized. She had saved the potential for one. Word of the steaming field spread through the valley like wildfire. People came in their trucks and on foot, lining the road, staring at the impossible sight. They saw the ruin of their own livelihoods, and then looked at the one place that had been spared. Mr. Abernathy arrived, his face grim. He saw the crowd, he saw the misty field, and he saw Silas standing beside Alara, a silent, a formidable guard. Abernathy marched up to them, his face flushed with anger and disbelief. "What trick is this?" he demanded. Silas stepped forward slightly. "It's no trick, Abernathy, it's just good farming." The simple statement, coming from a man as respected and grounded as Silas, carried immense weight. It was a verdict. Abernathy looked from Silas's stony face to Alara's quiet composure. He saw the end of his plan to seize the land. He saw his own authority evaporating in the morning mist. He opened his mouth to say something, another threat, another dismissal, but no words came. He was defeated not by an argument, but by a fact he could not explain. He turned without a word and pushed his way back through the silent, watching crowd. The community's perception had shifted. The whispers of mole girl and crazy dirt digger died, replaced by a new, hushed vocabulary. They didn't understand what she had done, but they could not deny the result. She was no longer the fool. She was the exception, the mystery. In the weeks that followed, the farm became a different kind of place. Silas, having lost his own crop, threw his energy into helping Alara. He brought his tractor and helped her clear the surface of the dead lavender, tilling the soil and preparing it for a new planting. He was her first student, listening intently as she explained the principles she had learned from Isolde's journals. He was a practical man, and once he accepted the unbelievable truth, he dedicated himself to its application. Other farmers, their seasons lost, began to drift over. They came with hats in their hands, and a humility born of desperation. They asked questions. They looked at the stone culverts she had unearthed. They touched the soil and felt its strange, living coolness. Alara, the outcast, became a teacher. She shared the pages of Isolde's journals, explaining the forgotten wisdom of working with the Earth's natural thermal properties instead of fighting against them. She was no longer a ghost. She had an anchor, and it was rooted deep in the soil of the valley. She used the last of her money, supplemented by a loan from a suddenly respectful town bank, to buy new lavender cuttings. With the help of Silas and 2 other farmers, they planted the 5 acres. And this time, when the roots went into the soil, they were met not with dry, indifferent dirt, but with the gentle, breathing presence of the stone veins below. The farm was no longer dormant, it was awake. Years passed. The story of the great frost and the steaming field became a piece of local folklore, a legend told to children. Alara's lavender farm did not just survive, it thrived. The sub-irrigation and thermal regulation provided by the ancient system made her crops more resilient, more fragrant, more vibrant than any in the region. The lavender bloomed in a riot of purple so intense it seemed to hum with color. Her harvests were bountiful, and the oil she distilled was prized for its purity and potency. The worthless farm became the most prosperous enterprise in Solitude Valley, but its true legacy was not in the lavender, it was in the stone. Following the principles rediscovered by Alara, other farmers in the valley began to unearth and restore their own forgotten culvert systems. The valley's agriculture was transformed. They became known for their resilience to drought and frost, their ability to produce crops when neighboring regions failed. The thirsty land of Solitude Valley became a quiet miracle of ingenuity. Alara was no longer the mole girl. They called her the founder, the woman who had listened to the ground and taught them all to do the same. She lived out her days on the farm, a respected and quiet figure, forever bound to the land that had saved her as much as she had saved it. There is a profound lesson in the story of the girl and the lavender farm. It is a testament to the courage required to look foolish, to trust a whisper of quiet, forgotten knowledge against the deafening shout of conventional wisdom. The world often judges value by what is immediately visible on the surface, the peeling paint, the dead stalks, the dry topsoil. It dismisses what it cannot easily see or understand. But true potential, like the stone veins of Alara's farm, often lies buried, waiting for someone with the patience to dig, the persistence to clear away the debris of neglect, and the faith to believe in what others have long forgotten. Alara's story is a reminder that our greatest resources are not always the obvious ones. Sometimes they are the strange ideas inherited from an eccentric aunt, the wisdom hidden in a dusty book, or the quiet, persistent warmth that can be found in the deep earth, if only we are willing to do the work to find it. She arrived in Solitude Valley with nothing, a homeless girl on the edge of oblivion. She inherited a patch of dirt that everyone else saw as a liability, but by looking beneath the surface, she unearthed not just a forgotten technology, but her own resilience, her own purpose, and a future for an entire community. She proved that sometimes the most valuable thing you can find is the potential that everyone else has thrown away.